Well, welcome back to video 2 of our series, Money and Marriage in Ministry. You know, I made a statement in the first video about being a part of the pastoral fraternity. You know, I do feel that way about you men that are watching this, especially if you're a senior pastor. You know, the word fraternity is defined as a group of people sharing a common profession or interest. And obviously we understand ministry as a calling, but it is a profession as well. In fact, the Bible word is vocation. We are to walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called. But we do share that. And I hope and pray that you would hear this teaching as a way of ministering to you, my brothers, in this fraternity of the pastorate. Well, I am joined in partnership with Brother Greg Joyner in R3 Ministry Network to revive, refresh, and restore. And then my ministry is called Advanced Pastoral Concepts. And we trust these videos will be a great blessing to you and a help to your ministry. We said that I'm going to break these videos down into 3 sections. Video number 1, we were discussing the biblical foundation regarding stewardship. Today, this video is going to be more of a practical instruction regarding your personal finances. And let me just say, I hope that this information will not only maybe be a help and a blessing to you personally, but maybe even to you professionally, meaning as you help families with their finances. I believe I'm going to give you a lot of practical help that may even be something that you teach to your church family, or something that you could use with an individual family that is needing some instruction in the area of finances. And then, of course, the video that follows this will be more on church finance and administration. So let's jump right into this. We're going to call this section here, Steps to Financial Freedom. You know, the Bible says in Proverbs 27:23, "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds." And of course, we know in Bible days, flocks and herds were somewhat synonymous with riches or wealth. And the Bible principle here is that we're diligent. Obviously, in our finances, whether they be personal or professional, we need to be diligent in watching over them and knowing what state they are in. And so, again, as we look at this video being a little more practical, I'm going to give you a lot of thoughts, a lot of information in a short period of time. And so, Lord willing, this will be a help and a blessing to all of us to make sure that our diligence is going to pay dividends because we do know the state of our flocks. Let me first talk to you, number 1, about financial freedom from the past. What do I mean by that? You know, a lot of personal finances, oftentimes they are dealing with issues in the present because of decisions made in the past. And so as we get into this, we have to kind of deal with the past first. So what could we learn from this, or what might be one of the things first that we do? Number 1, I want to give you the word sanctions. What are some sanctions that we would place upon the particulars or the areas of finance that maybe are causing us difficulty? You know, you say, preacher, what's the word sanction mean? It's a coercive measure intended to ensure compliance. So when you put a sanction upon something, you're wanting there to be a change. And so what are some things in our finances that maybe we need to stop doing so that we can start doing? So number 1, I'd like you to think about this thought. We must reverse the root causes of debt. We must reverse the root causes of debt. I don't know why you might be in personal debt. I don't know if it is a credit card that maybe the limit just was high enough that you continued to spend and it just got out of hand. Maybe you bought a house that was a little larger than you really could afford. And so if you're going to get your handle on the financial situation or condition that you find yourself in, you're going to have to reverse what caused you to get into that particular problem. And of course, debt obviously is due to borrowing. And that brings me to number 2, refuse to continue borrowing. Just stop. You're going to have to maybe cut your credit cards up. Maybe you're going to have to sell the home in which you live and downsize. Again, you're going to have to make these determinations. Every family is going to have to make the choices that are going to affect their particular situation. But it may be that we just have to say, stop on this. We're just not going. We're going to live by cash. We're not going to live on credit. You know, the Bible gives us some good thinking about this. Proverbs 22, verse number 7, very clearly, the borrower is servant to the lender. You know, when you and I go into debt, then that company really becomes our master. You know, MasterCard is called that for a reason. So the debt that we have that maybe just needs to be changed, we need to look at it differently. We need to do it differently. And may I say also, it must be dictated by discipline. You're going to have to place some constraints, or that might be that word sanctions, again, in your own personal financing as it relates to borrowing. Now let me just say as a parenthesis here, you know, some may say there's good debt and there's bad debt. And I do agree with that to an extent. For instance, good debt may be debt that appreciates. Bad debt might be debt that depreciates. Let's use an illustration here. If you take out a home mortgage on a home, that is usually considered good debt. Why? Because typically in most markets, this market right now, it's doing this on an accelerated scale. It is appreciating. Homes are selling for way more than really maybe they're even worth. And I understand the market there fluctuates up and down, and you want to be careful of ever buying at the top of the market and then having to sell at the bottom of the market. But my point is that a home or a mortgage, that might be considered good debt because it does appreciate. But if you think about something else, maybe even like a car. Now, I think we all at some point have had a car loan, and that may be a difficult pill to swallow, but let's just be honest. When we buy a car and we keep it for 5 years, it is worth way less than we paid for it initially. So what I'm saying is we just have to be very wise in the way that we get ourselves into debt difficulty. Credit cards, for instance, depending on what you spend your credit cards or use your credit cards for. You know, if you go through the McDonald's drive-through and you throw your credit card down, you know, obviously that is a depreciating debt. You're putting money on a card that is going to, especially if it is not paid off monthly. And I understand the concept there, but we must be careful of just driving that debt up that never gets brought down on a monthly basis on things that are, and here's the word, consumed. Why do you think they call credit cards consumer debt? Well, there's a reason for that. We're consuming it. And once you consume it, it's gone. It's not there for the future. So we want to reverse the root causes of debt. Number 2, we want to refuse to continue borrowing. All right, so let's go to letter B then. We said if we want to have financial freedom from the past, number 1, sanctions, but number 2, we need to then have a surplus. All right, so we have the negative, and now we have the positive. How then are we going to have more money than we need, or what we would call a surplus? Well, number 1, let's talk about obtaining a surplus. Obtaining a surplus. Number 1, there's really two ways about this. You either increase your income or you decrease your outgo. I heard someone say it this way: either cut back, cut out, or cut loose. You may have to let some things go if you're going to be able to obtain a surplus. Maybe you pick up a second job. What are you doing? You're increasing your income. It may be that you sell your second car. What are you doing there? You are letting something go that you maybe cannot afford, or you downsize in some way. So, number one, we're obtaining a surplus. Secondly, then, we want to learn to use a surplus. Now, if we're going to look at this issue of debt, and again, if you're in debt, there's got to be a surplus, meaning money above your general fund. I'm using a church phrase there, right? But you're looking more than just what's in your bank account, because we're talking about personal finances here. And so you're going to have to make sure you're bringing in more than you're spending. So when that happens, how then do you eat this debt down? Well, have you ever heard the phrase using a debt snowball? A debt snowball. And there's a lot of teaching on this, and I subscribe to this, especially as I try to help families to get out of debt. What do you do? Well, let me just give you some real quick bullet points about it. Number one, list all of your debts, smallest to largest. Now, we're not even going to think about what the interest rates are right now. And I know there's some plans, they say, pay the highest interest rate down first. But there's a lot of psychological reasons of just as you're listing your debts. Let's say you have 5 outstanding debts. Let's take the smallest one first. What you're trying to do is to build momentum. All right, that's the word here, building momentum, a debt snowball. You want to imagine in your mind that it's rolling down the hill and it's picking up steam. So you're going to list all your debts, smallest to largest. And then secondly, you're going to apply the surplus, any extra money. Some may call it found money. Now, it may be that you have a garage sale, and it may be that you sell $1,000 worth of stuff you don't need, and you take that $1,000 because it's surplus, it's above what your monthly budget is, and you begin to knock out those debts. So you're going to apply your surplus to the smallest debt until that debt is paid off. Now, why are you going to do it that way? Well, number one, if it's the smallest debt, it probably will be the one most quickly paid. And so what that's going to do is you take that monthly payment that you were making on that first installment, or on that first debt, that smallest debt, and you then have a built-in surplus to begin applying to debt 2, which is the next largest one. And you're applying that monthly payment until that snowball, till that one gets paid off, and then you have that monthly payment to begin adding. Does that make sense? So we are obtaining a surplus. We're doing what we can to find some extra money. Number 2, we're using then that surplus. Let me ask you a question before we move on. How much freed up money would you have if you had 0 debt? I want you to think about that. If you didn't have a mortgage, if you did not have 3 credit cards that were maxed out, if you did not have that personal loan, if you would not have taken out that home equity line of credit, think about how much freed money that would give you in a normal month. So I'm just getting you to try to think about these things. Now, again, I understand you may be in this situation now. We're talking about let's get out of this situation, because why? We want some financial freedom from the past. Now, secondly, let's move on to financial freedom for the present. Financial freedom for the present. We're going to begin talking about a budget. Letter A, planning a budget. Let's talk about that. Planning a budget. A budget really it's a plan, it's a prioritization, it's producing a system, it's producing something for you to follow. It gives you something to work with. We might call it a game plan. Look, if you just always talk about getting out of debt, but you never put a budget into place, then you are probably most likely going to remain, as a borrower does, a servant to the lender. So you're going to have to learn to plan a budget. I just have 3 quick questions here just to ask you about this. Number 1, ask yourself, where am I now? I want you just to think about it. Where am I now financially? Where's my income? Does my income need to increase? Is there a way for me to bring more money in on a monthly basis? What are my basic needs? What is my housing? What does it cost? My transportation. My children, what does it take to clothe them, to educate them? Look, if you want to put your children in a Christian school, you're going to have to plan for that. So you first ask the question, where am I right now? Secondly, here's the next question, where do I need to go? Where do I need to go? What am I trying to achieve? What is my goal here? All right, number one is debt elimination. Is that a goal? You're planning the budget so that you can reach these particular goals. And again, debt elimination goes back to the points that we just discussed. Let me just ask you, in planning a budget, do you have an emergency fund? What are you going to do if the tire blows on your car? What are you going to do if your dishwasher breaks, or your washing machine or your dryer breaks down? Your water heater goes out. I'm just asking you a question. What's your plan? You see, when you plan a budget, you're also planning for the emergencies that may take place. Future savings. Look, I believe we need to even budget for the future, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But you got to ask yourself the question, where am I trying to go? What am I trying to achieve by doing this? Or talk about future savings. Are you going to have enough to send your kids to college or to help them to go to college? How about weddings, future weddings? I had 2 daughters, and obviously weddings are not inexpensive ventures, and they're wonderful, wonderful occasions and beautiful, wonderful memories. Somebody's got to pay for that. And again, instead of going into debt for that, you begin to plan for that. How about a vacation? You want to take a vacation in the summertime. That needs to be a part of the planning and budgeting process. To replace a vehicle, possibly, or even in giving. And obviously, we'll talk about this in a moment. But in my opinion, the first item in my budget every month is, what do I owe to my God? What is my tithe? 10% right off the top, right off of the gross number. Why? Because it's in my budget, and I don't have to wrestle in my mind with whether or not I'm going to be obedient to the Lord in that area. So I'm asking myself these questions. Where am I right now? Number 2, where do I need to go? And then number 3, obviously, how do I get there? How do I get there? And that's what we'll call wise stewardship. Wise stewardship. So what does wise stewardship do? Well, that brings us to letter B, prioritizing a budget. So we've planned. Now we're going to prioritize. Let me just give you some real quick thoughts about this. Number 1, the Lord must be first. I said that a moment ago in our tithing. The Lord must be first. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, verses 9 and 10 of that same passage, talks about trusting in the Lord with all of our heart and in all of our ways acknowledge Him. And we love verses 5 and 6. If you just keep reading, you'll find in Proverbs 3 that you're going to find in verse 9, honor the Lord with your substance and with all of your increase. Obviously, giving to the Lord must be a priority. Secondly, let me just say, we're prioritizing a budget here, and we're going to get real practical. Number 2, taxes must be paid. So you give to the Lord first. Number 2, you also have to make sure, if you're going to be a Bible-believing and obeying Christian, Romans 13 verses 6 and 7 are pretty clear. Matthew 22, even in the words of Jesus, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And we know and understand that priority. Taxes must be paid. Number 3, we're prioritizing a budget. Debts then must be paid. Debts must be paid. We've talked about that, getting out of debt, doing what you can, what you must, what you should to eliminate all debt. That's your end goal. Debts must be paid because we are prioritizing in our budget that we're not going to spend money on things that are depreciating. Number 4, your family must be provided for. 1 Timothy 5 and verse number 8 reminds us that if a man does not take care of his household, he's worse than an infidel. We've got to prioritize family. I mentioned vacations a moment ago, and my girls are both grown and married now, and they've been out of the house for a while, but we still talk with fondness when we're together about family vacations and memories that we made. The reason we were able to do that is not because I made a lot of money. It's because I prioritized in my budget that my family, my children and my wife, they were first. I wanted to, after the Lord, we understand that God is first. But in that next order of priority, that my family got what they needed. And we're not talking about living extravagantly, and we're not talking about, where we bought just all the name brand clothing. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is to make sure that my family, my wife and my kids, they know that they have been cared for. They have been provided for. And then number 5, under prioritizing a budget, the future must be saved for. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6, 7, and 8, and it gives the great example of go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and how definitely we're taking part when it's plenty, so that we can then in times of leanness that we'll have. So in the summer, the ant takes care of providing for food for the winter time. Look, if that can be done in the animal kingdom, obviously we ought to be smart enough to realize that as well. Look, the future is going to happen, and you have to prioritize in your budget to take care of future items. All right, that leads me to letter C then, producing a budget. So we have planned a budget, we have prioritized the budget, and now we're going to produce a budget. How do you do that? Let me just give you some quick thoughts here. Number 1, determine your gross monthly income. And when I say that, I'm talking about a household income. If both husband and wife work, what is that total number? All right? What is that number before you have paid anything? What is that major final number? In producing a budget, you've got to know what you're working with. And that's what we call a gross, without anything yet being taken out of that. What is your gross monthly income? Number 2, then you subtract your tithe and your taxes. Okay, we just said those are the non-negotiables. I'm going to give God 10%. And then the government is going to get what is coming to the government, what I owe as a debt to Uncle Sam. You subtract your tithe and taxes to then determine what is your net income. So you have this gross income, that's your total number. You take away these non-negotiables, and then that gives you the amount of money that you can begin to build your budget on. Number 3, list every expenditure, actual and anticipated. Actual and anticipated. All right, my mortgage is X amount of dollars. Let's just use a round number. It's $1,000 a month. All right, I know that must be placed in my budget at a high premium. I've got to have a house to live in, right? Obviously, you have to insure that house, and on down the food that you're going to spend, what your budget is for your utilities and your transportation, and on down the line. You're going to list every expenditure, even expenditures that you are anticipating that are going to come. All right, so be smart about this. Don't be blinded in say, well, because I'm not seeing it, it's not really there. Look, if it's something that is coming down the line, you've got to make sure you're budgeting for that so that you're not caught off guard. Look, folks, here's what happens. If you are not anticipating it, and there's not a budget item or an emergency fund for you to pay for that, that's why you go into debt. Because you're just going to slap that credit card down, and then before long, that thing gets larger than you can afford to pay, and then it's going to put you in great detriment there. All right, and then number 4, under producing a budget, then give every dollar a name or a job before the month begins. And that really is what a budget is. You're allocating a certain amount of money. All right, $1,000, this is going to go to my budget or to my mortgage. I know that. This is what my insurance is going to cost for my home, for my health insurance, whatever these items are. Then assign this amount of money is going to go toward. That's what budgeting is. It's allocating. All right, and if you know what you spend in a month's time, and you know what that income is, then you're going to know: do I need to raise my income? Or do I have to take some of these things out of the budget because I can't afford them? All right? And so that's a real great thought about living within this budget. And then letter D is going to bring us to maybe the hardest part of this, and that's persevering with the budget. All right? What's that mean? Well, I wrote a few things down. Determination, discipline, and dependence. Determination, discipline, and dependence. Look, some of you just need to determine you're going to get out of debt. Some of us need to determine we're going to live within a budget. Some of us are going to have to discipline ourselves. We're going to have to tell ourselves no. That's what a budget can do. It's on paper where you know this is what I can afford, this is what I can't afford. We can't afford, we want to go on vacation, but maybe we're not going to be able to go to XYZ place that we're going to have to fly to. It's a staycation instead, right? You ever heard that? You just stay home, you still take some time out, some time to refresh, spend some time with your family. What I'm saying is that as you develop this budget and live within the budget and learn to persevere with the budget, I promise you're going to find more money than you thought you had because you're spending it on the priorities of life. So you may have to discipline or say no in some areas. And then obviously dependence. We're all dependent upon God. And we need Him to help us with our finances. But I believe that God also blesses diligence, and I believe that God blesses organization, and I believe that God blesses administration. We'll talk about that when we talk about church finances. And God wants to be able to bless these things that you have by wisdom put into place. You're going to need to balance and reconcile each month so you know what your income and your outgo is, a disposal of debt, living within your means, maybe having an accountability partner. Obviously, if you're married, this would be your spouse, a husband and a wife. They need to work together. And I mentioned a little earlier how that maybe one may have a better skill set, a little more analytical mind or thinking about it. And so make sure the roles are where they need to be, and then that you're accountable to one another. And then may I say this, seek counsel if needed. Look, and I know I'm talking to pastors here, but look, pastor, if this is an area where you're out of line, and maybe you have never been taught these things, go find a senior pastor, go find a mentor somewhere, and let them help you. Why? Because as a pastor, you've got people that are looking to you for guidance as well. And you can't teach what you don't know. And it's very hard to teach what you don't live. And so seek some counsel if needed, and then view this as a spiritual exercise. You know, there's so much in the Bible about giving and stewardship. And so obviously persevering with the budget, living within your means, is a spiritual exercise. Let me say this before I move to the last main point. Take control of your money before it takes control of you. Take control of your money before it takes control of you. All right, Roman numeral 3, this is our last major point here for this outline. Financial freedom for the future. We've talked about the past. We've talked about the present. That's building the budget right now. These are my actual expenses right now. How can I then look forward? Financial freedom for the future. You know, Proverbs 27:12, the Bible says that a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and they're punished. You know, I think too often financially, people are punished because they're not prudent. They just hide their eyes. If I don't see it, then it's not really there. You cannot stick your head in the sand forever. Look, the future's coming. It is coming as soon as tomorrow. And I understand that maybe when we think of the future, we think, well, I'll get to that. Do you know the best way to be prepared 10 years from now? It's to start preparing today. And so I want to give you just a couple of thoughts about financial freedom for the future. Letter A, let's start saving for the short term. Let's start saving for the short term. I've mentioned emergency fund, right? We kind of talked about that a little while ago. An emergency fund is just that. It's money that you have saved that may have to be spent next month or may have to be spent in 3 months. Again, you don't know when that tire may blow. You don't know when that appliance is going to stop working. And you're going to have some savings, not a credit card. Savings for the short term. This may be money that you set aside in just a simple savings account at the bank. I would suggest to you that you keep this in a separate account, not just your general account. If you're not careful, that money will be swallowed up in your monthly money. But if you have a separate account, whether it's just a simple savings account, maybe that's what you call it, or you call it your emergency fund, but it's a separate account. You might even want to put it in a money market where it's going to earn a little bit of interest. This right here is not for long-term savings. You're not trying to beat the stock market with this. You're trying to have funds that are liquid. All right? Why? Because it's for an emergency, saving for the short term. All right? But then let's go a little farther. Then letter B, saving for the long term. Saving for the long term. Now, this would be as you're thinking about your future retirement. You're thinking about saving maybe for kids' college. You're thinking about long-term, more expensive ventures where maybe the money doesn't have to be fluid or liquid right now. And so you can put it into a vehicle where you're going to be able to earn some interest on this, to use the miracle of compound interest, they say. I have suggested for years that especially young couples begin to save in what we call a Roth IRA. And again, I'm not going to take time to teach about that right now, but the Roth IRA is one of the greatest vehicles that the federal government has given to investors for them to be able to take advantage of long-term growth in an IRA, an individual retirement account. And obviously this is, and there are certain different vehicles that you can put this in and so forth. And I would even suggest maybe talking to a financial planner that can help you to do what is best for your situation or your family. But maybe a Roth IRA, something, if let's say you work, someone works in a secular setting, maybe a 401k, obviously, maybe to take advantage of an employer match program. Look, that's free money. You know, if they allow you, and I'm going to talk about this in the next video, even in the church realm, I tried to make available to my assistant pastoral staff, especially these young guys, I wanted them to have an ability to start saving for retirement. And so they could save up to 3% of their income. If they gave 3%, the church would match 3%. If they gave 1%, the church would match 1%. But what was that doing? That was incentivizing them. That's free money to the employer, to the employee. So we're talking about saving for the long haul. Let me let you think about this. Pay off your house. What are you doing? You're in that appreciated piece of property. All right. If there's no debt on that, that is absolutely a wonderful vehicle. Real estate is a wonderful vehicle for you to kind of not just hold your money, but to grow your money. So I want you to get your mind wrapped around not just doing everything to just get by, but I'm saving now for the long term. Letter C, saving for the next generation. Proverbs 13 and Proverbs 19 both discuss the knowing that we should be looking forward to care for those that come behind us. You know, the Bible says that a good man leaveth an inheritance even to his children's children. So an inheritance, that's something very important to leave behind. We know that that's much more than just money. Obviously, that should be a good name and a legacy that we leave behind. But there's nothing to be said for not leaving something that we can pass down of a tangible nature. You know, secondly, you might consider life insurance. Life insurance is something that everybody needs. And upon your passing, obviously a lump sum can be left to not only your spouse, but your children. So that would be something to consider for the next generation. And then, of course, everybody needs to have a last will and testament. Over the years of pastoring, I've dealt with a few situations where someone has died and they did not leave a will. And obviously just so much detriment to the family that is so very unnecessary. So I hope that you'll look at these things, saving for the short term, saving for the long term, and then saving for the next generation. Well, we've been discussing money and marriage in ministry. There's one more video. I trust that you'll continue to watch and to learn. The next video is going to be on church finance and administration. So from R3 Ministries and Advanced Pastoral Concepts, God bless you until we see you again.